Hello everyone, I have a comparison video for you people today. I'm going to be comparing parts made by PDI, Laylax, and Airsoft GI, as well as the stock parts, JG. I'm going to start with the PDI Raven Cylinder over here. It's PDI's custom, it's a custom cylinder for the VSR10, and it's basically the reinforced version of the stock part, and it's been coated. It's specially treated, so it has a protective finish, but unfortunately for me, this is mine by the way, it's starting to wear off. See? So it's removing a little bit of silver, unlike the matte black you get when you first get it. Now the one thing I don't like about this is the fact that it only has two pins that holds the cylinder itself to the bolt head. So what this means that every time the piston slams forward when it's transferring the energy, a lot of stress is placed on these two pins. Now, unlike the Laylax, it has four of these pins, so a lot less stress is placed on each of those pins individually. Same goes for the stock cylinder. However, the good thing about this is it's actually very cheap compared to the Laylax. It's $110, which includes the cylinder head. Unlike the Laylax, it's $150, but doesn't include the cylinder head, so you're going to have to buy the cylinder head, which is another $26. Moving on to the Laylax, it's probably aluminum as well, and it's coated with Teflon. So Teflon is basically a non-stick material. They use it a lot for cookware, and it reduces the friction by a lot. Now the rings around the piston also uses Teflon, so it overall reduces the friction by a lot. The stock cylinder is probably the worst out of all of them, obviously. It's probably brass, not sure. Someone can tell me. As you can see, because this one is being used on the 45 system, the top part is being scratched off, just because of the way the energy is directed from the spring. It is very weak. If you're using a high power spring, you will destroy your threading over here, which is not good. It's going to render your gun unusable. You're going to have to buy a new cylinder. So that's it. Honestly, I recommend. It actually depends on which trigger you're using. If you're using the PDI trigger, you probably should go full PDI because of what it comes with. I'll explain that later. Moving on. This is the Laylax Spring guide. And this is the Airsoft GI Spring guide. I don't know if you can see that, but this is much skinnier than this one. And this one, it's much heavier than this one, and this feels like it's going to be much more sturdier than this one. However, because of the design and the spring guide itself, it doesn't have as much stress as the piston itself. Even if you have a cheap spring guide like this one, it will probably last you a while before it breaks. Actually, I highly doubt it will break anyways. It comes with ball bearing spring. It's a ball bearing spring guide as well as this, but the ball bearing on this one is much better than the ball bearing on this one. It has a lot more friction here. Oops. There's that. Moving on to the trigger. This is the stock trigger mechanism with the upgraded Airsoft GI sear sets. I wholly dislike 45 systems. I hate them. They're just awful. I don't know why people will still make the upgraded sear sets with this. I mean, and you might as just go get a 90-degree trigger box like the Zero Trigger or the V-Trigger. They are very expensive. Newbie used to make a very relatively cheap 90-degree system, but he doesn't really make triggers anymore, which is unfortunate because they were actually very nice for the price. So it's a 45, as you can see here, and the way it works is it directs the pressure down and up. So when the piston is coming this way, it's also forcing it down. So when you pull the trigger, this part goes down like that, and the piston slams forward. Problem with that is it forces the piston upwards, so it damages your damages your cylinder, as I shown in as is shown in the stock cylinder. This is the Laylax Zero Trigger. The Zero Trigger is very nice because, unlike the V-Trigger, if you have a very stiff spring, the trigger is going to be stiffer. The trigger pull gets progressively stiffer as you move up the spring ratings. I don't know if you can see this, but the way it's designed is very nicely designed. It has a series of rollers that minimizes the trigger pull. See, as it's going the pressure is being applied this way, and when that part, you can see that right there, when that part goes down, this part moves forward, which allows the piston to slam forward. It's very nice. The only bad thing about this is you could get a lemon. It's very unlikely, but it happens. And when you get a lemon, you're pretty much stuck with it because there are no replacement parts for the Zero Trigger, which is probably the biggest con for it. So let's just say your piston sear broke right here. If this snaps, you're screwed. You're gonna have to buy a new Zero Trigger, and they're very expensive. And on top of that, if you just need to replace your Zero Trigger, you also have to buy the piston that comes along with it. You can't buy them separately. Together, they are $230 to $250 depending on where you buy it. So it is very pricey, but it is very important to drop some money on this instead of cheaping out on the 45 and have it fail on you later. Now, this is the PDI V-Trigger. The PDI V-Trigger is basically a heavily reinforced version of this. As you can see, the shape is very similar. It's reinforced. It's very strong. The sears and the trigger is all steel, but the trigger box itself is not steel. The trigger pull is much heavier than the Laylax because of the way it's designed. It's similar to the Maruzen system. And saying it's similar is a stretch because if you've seen it, it's not identical, but the way it operates is the same principle. So that's for the trigger. Moving on to the piston. This is the ASGI PE piston set. It's okay. It's not bad. It's 45, which I don't like. And the top, this O-ring right here, is what dampens the impact. And it's very similar to the PDI system, the PDI pistons, their way of using an O-ring as a dampener. So it does happen to have the same problem, which is this part does like to fall out, so you're going to have to open it up and glue it back in occasionally. Which is a con. It has 4 portings, so when the piston is rushing forward, it creates air pressure, which expands this and creates a nice air seal. It does its job. Other than that, it has the Teflon rings I was talking about before. This is the Laylax piston. It's much better. It comes with a air brake, but you shouldn't use the air brake. Just like swap it out with stock with the grub screw that's included. It's 90 degrees, and you can easily tell if it's 90 or a 45 because with the 90 it's orange. Now in the video it looks yellow, but it's supposed to be orange. And that's for the 90, and if it's red, that means it's a 45. And this is the Laylax, and it's much better than the Airsoft GI, but this one is also quite a bit more expensive. $50 around there. This is probably around $30. I'm not sure. I didn't check the price on Airsoft GI. You should probably go do that. Up next is the different cylinder head. So this is the PDI cylinder head that came with the cylinder. As you can see, the tapering is very well done, and unfortunately I'm missing the O-ring up here, but it doesn't matter because this part is actually quite a bit wider than what the bucket can accept. But if you force it in there, that's what she said, it will expand and create a very, very nice air seal. Unfortunately for the Laylax, it's not actually designed very well. As you can see, it still tapers off a little bit over here. Unfortunately, what that means is the air seal is not going to be as good as with the PDI. Now, also, the taper is definitely not as well done as the PDI, so that's a con. But it does come with a dampener, so you're going to have less stress on the internals overall. The worst is the stock cylinder. The tapering is horrible, although you can mod it to have a very nice taper. I've done it with the cylinder head. It's not that hard. You stick this part into a drill, and then you make it turn, sort of like a lathe, and then you sand this part down until you have a nice taper. So that's basically it. Now, overall, my recommendation is never go with the GI parts, simply because you're gonna have to go with all the better parts eventually, anyways. So whether in like a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or a couple of years, you're gonna have to go to them anyways. Now, depending on which trigger system you want to use, which is basically the V-Trigger and the Zero Trigger, you gotta think about it. V-Trigger is very nice. You know, if you get a lemon, you can't fix it. That's the only bad part. It has a very light trigger pull, which is amazing. There's no force that's required to pull the trigger, even if you like a very heavy spring. However, the V-Trigger, if you go on Xfire, they have every single internal replacement part for the spring, for every single sear, every single pin. They have that. So if something does fail, which is very unlikely, you can get it replaced, which is good. Another thing to mention is that the V-Trigger accepts a safety, but the Zero Trigger does not. But it doesn't really matter, since you shouldn't be using a safety on a bolt on the VS or 10, simply because you might accidentally switch it to safety, and then when you're trying to shoot, it doesn't shoot, and you realize the safety's off, and then it's just a pain in the ass. So there's no point having a safety on the VS or 10. It's just going to get in the way. Moving on from that, depending on which trigger system you want to go with, you want to go with their compatible systems. So I bought this as a clearance item, so it didn't come with the piston end, a PDI piston end. Basically, every single PDI piston is 45. However, if you buy the V-Trigger, it will come with a piston end that converts it to a 45. So you basically unscrew the back of the PDI piston, and then you screw in the piston sear, whatever, I can't remember what it's called. You screw that part inside, and then you have a 90-degree system. So normally this will run about $150 to $170, probably around that price range. Not too sure. So if you do that, you might as well run full PDI. However, if you don't want to use PDI parts, it's fine. But if you don't want to use PDI parts, you're gonna have to go with a Teflon cylinder. I'm gonna explain to you why. With the Raven cylinder, the Laylax piston is actually a little bit too thick, so it can't go in. So if you're going to use a Laylax, a PDI cylinder, you want to go with PDI internals. As to the general rule of compatibility, you want to make sure all the parts are compatible. You want to buy from the same company. But if you're running a oh, the bus is here for something. I'm not sure. For the Laylax, you should run Laylax parts. As you can see, they're built to fit with each other very well. But honestly, it doesn't. The trigger, it plays a role in deciding which company you want to use. But you can run Laylax trigger with all full PDI cylinder parts. So that's the PDI Spring, PDI Spring guy, PDI Cylinder, PDI Piston. You can run a Laylax with all that, and vice versa. So it doesn't really matter. Just remember the cylinder itself, it has to be compatible. Now you can definitely mod a Laylax to fit inside a Raven. That's what I've done, because I have Laylax internals with I have Laylax Piston, Spring, and Spring guide, but PDI trigger and a cylinder. So you don't have to mod those for them to work correctly. Anyways, I think that's basically what I have to say. Thanks for watching.